Okay, we're going to continue with the next presentation that's about Oracle Application Monitoring, and that's going to be presented by Daniel Röttgermann. Daniel Röttgermann has been a long-standing Checkmk customer. He's never missed a conference, and of course we had a very great evening last year in a group with several other people from Switzerland. Actually, it was a lot of fun, and Daniel and Swisscom and ourselves, we actually did the starting point for the Managed Service Edition, and we've had the idea for a while, but Daniel actually started the initial project with us, and he supported us not only with financing, but also with the feedback and also the product management and also the knowledge that was required in order to know what the most important features would be. And the second topic that we've been working on together is the whole topic of Oracle monitoring. And in this case, it's not only low level, but of course we also work with OPITs, but also the whole topic of applications that are going to be running on Oracle. So that means that it's a level higher, it's definitely closer to application monitoring. And that's also the topic for the next presentation. And I would say, Daniel, let's get started. Thank you very much for taking care of that. I'm very curious to hear what you have to say. Yeah, hello everybody. Thank you very much, Matthias, for this introduction. Hello from Switzerland. I'm in Zurich right now. And just to tell you about myself, Matthias already told you everything you need to know about me. Basically, my name is Daniel Röttgermann. I think I've been in monitoring for the past about 12 years or so. I work for Swisscom. I am in the banking sector, and I am in the monitoring team. So just telling you about Swisscom, I have to do that. We have 20,000 employees. It's a Swiss telecommunication company, if you don't know us. And yeah, 20,000 employees, of course, that means we have a lot of different departments as well. And that's why I am telling you today about what we are doing in Swisscom banking, specifically when it comes to Oracle application monitoring. Okay, just about the agenda. Who are we? Swisscom Banking, and then Swisscom Banking requirements. So what kind of requirements do we have, Swisscom Banking, when it comes to the Oracle monitoring? And then we also have the requirements of our customers. Of course, they have their respective requirements, and then I'm going to show you the demo or the sample views that is pre-recorded, because that would be difficult via VPN, etc. So that is pre-recorded, and I'm going to show you that. And then we have the challenges. Of course, there are a lot of challenges. There still are some. And then we're also going to talk about the future, what is going to happen with MK Oracle in the future, and also how are we going to continue with that. And in the end, we are going to have a Q&A. So let's get started. Okay, so Swisscom Banking, we are the biggest provider in the banking sector for business processes, innovation, etc. So it's really everything for tomorrow, if you want to call it that. For us, I can tell you, well, what we're really doing, just to give you some facts and figures about our banking. We have more than 100 migrations in the banking sector that we've already carried out. We have more than 70 customers. So it could be anything. It could be a payment transfer, etc. It could be anything. So we also have more than 75 banks that we have as customers for application monitoring. That's quite a large number. And of course, a lot of enterprise customers, and they have great requirements for us and also the software. For 51 banks, we are operating their banking platform, so we're responsible for their banking platform. And we have more than 23 banks and companies from the financial sector for which we do research, TrendSearch, eForesight. So we're very proud of that as well. And it's also very important when it comes to monitoring in our monitoring environment. We're talking about more than 100 different systems that are all sort of working with the core banking applications. And in this case, it would be Vinova and Avaloq, which is very common in Switzerland. Those are the core banking applications. Yeah, there are about 100 different systems or even more that we're working with, and we do their monitoring. Just to give you a couple names, we don't have to talk about that in detail, but it's definitely, for those of you who know Switzerland, obviously those should find your own bank there. Of course, you can look at the slide later on as well. Just talking about our environment, just some fun facts. As Matthias already said, as in addition, in our case, it's a little bit different. So what we do is we have one host, and this one host then has more than 20 sites, and except for our master site, each site is a customer. So that means that one host is a cluster. I'm going to tell you about that more later, but every customer has their own site on there. And we have about 1,500 monitored hosts right now, 155,000 services that we're monitoring. And the number of 35 Oracle hosts doesn't sound like a lot, and it's not really true, but those are the hosts that we are currently monitoring fully. So there are definitely a lot more of them, a lot more Oracle hosts that we can monitor and we can expand on, but those are the ones where we are actually, where we've rolled out MK Oracle fully. That's about 35 of them. And I already looked it up. We have 100 Oracle instances, and overall we have 25,000 Oracle services. And it's not only the default checks that come with MK Oracle, but also based checks, which are based on the MK Oracle. And I'm going to tell you more about that later. In addition to that, we also have a specialty. We have up to 30 databases on one server, so instances on one server. Okay, just to explain our environment. So as Matthias already said, managed service setup in our case, so it's really high level. So as we heard earlier, we have our master side, and that's where all our Swisscom employees access everything. We also have our so-called slave sites, but overall they already represent one customer respectively. And since it's important for our customers, and that was also one of the requirements in general for our monitoring, is that the customer has access to their data and their information as well. That's what's required. So every customer has their own site, so they have access to that, and that way they can also access the monitored information. So every customer is in their own zone. Of course, that makes everything easier. Like I said, it's very high level, so I don't want to talk about that in detail, but every customer has their own zone. And there are some exceptions that's, of course, come with another challenge, but of course, all of this is on a web cluster, active and passive. And yeah, I think that's all you need to know as a short introduction for our setup. Okay, so every customer that's being added is a new site, and yeah, that's how we proceed until our server is gonna run out of resources. Okay, so our requirements from Swisscom Banking, since like I said, we have a large number of enterprise customers, of course, it is definitely required. We have a lot of flexibility and innovation at the same time. So let's just look at that. We have a couple core topics that we're working on. We just try to sort of categorize it in different areas. First of all, we just have some customer squells. So that is something that some of you may already have if you've been working with MK Oracle. So you may have tried it. And that is something that's been around for a while already. And that also means that I have my own SQL and I want to run that. And of course, in that case, I just want specific parameters for that. So it could be that I want to have in CFG that instead of be handed over to SQL. And of course, we also need performance data that goes with that. Of course, we also have to show availability for all the customer SQLs or the specific applications SQLs. And of course, that's one portion of it. So that means customer SQLs, that's definitely one requirement. Then we have MK Oracle-based checks. So they are just based on MK Oracle. So in this case, what happens is it's sort of like a piggyback. So that means that the MK Oracle is executing in SK Oracle, and then it's creating a section. And on the other side, on the monitoring server, I have a check that I've written myself, or whoever wrote it. There's a check that is then going to evaluate this information and is then going to create the services based on that. For us, it's very important because we have a huge plethora of complex, specifically for Everlake monitoring, of application specific that partially create hundreds of thousands of services. So if we would have to do that with custom SQLs, that would just be impossible, basically. So what we do is we actually create a list from the output of the SQL, and we then actually evaluate it with using the check, and then we actually get data and services. Now, for us, another requirement that's very important is the improvement of the inventory. So one part has been around for a while already. So Simon was actually the one. So there's status is very important, status, data, inventory. So that means that we, just to give you an example, we don't, well, data that's changing, table space, for example, that's continuously changing, but this data also needs to be in the inventory, but create tables, etc. For the application order, that just makes it where it's just, needing a good overview. And we don't want it to be an output of services where you just have to choose it. And then we also have application details. Application details would be, for example, every application has specific things that, again, also have to be shown, but you don't necessarily need a service for that. So that means we have done a lot, and we really require that functionality to gather data and then also be able to show it using tables. Tables, and that's the last point when it comes to inventory. So again, Simon, he just finished that yesterday. He actually tested yesterday. So it's mixing of status and inventory data. So what we want to do is we just want to mix status data and also inventory data. So that means on the one hand, we have inventory data from, well, it's all from the same database. However, it's different application-specific content, and they're from different tabs. And of course, we just want to sort of gather them in one view. And the last point for us, for Swisscom, is of course also the expansion of views and dashboards and the possibilities that derive from that. And of course, that's extremely important for us and for our teams who are then actually dealing with customers and they're chasing errors, etc. So one point for us that's very important is just making sure that we have improved Oracle applications. So we just want to make sure that we have Performator output, and then we can put it in tables as well. Okay, of course, our requirements aren't enough. We also have customer requirements at the same time. And of course, we also took that on early on, because what's worse than actually finishing something and thinking that it's good and then realizing that the customer has very specific requirements, and that would make it where all of our work was for nothing. So we also talked to our customers and discussed what their requirements were. A lot of things are very similar, and some things were added on top of what we already had. So custom SQLs, that is something that we just discussed, so that's clear. We also have more DB details and information. That's what the one SGA, PGA, and some of them have been around for long. Some of them are only in 1.7. Then, of course, also CPU memory for the respective instances is also very important to just have more transparency. And that way the customer can just look at the information themselves. At this point in time, you have to understand that in Avalok, for example, what happens is there's this productive database that's just one single instance, and there's a test environment where you could have about 30 instances or even more. And there's pre-core, dev test, etc., and also for many variances. And of course, it's very important that we just have the right information for every DB. And DBs are being run up and down, and they want the information right way. So what are the settings, at what level, and what DB? At the same time, more Oracle-based application information, that is also very important, that's very similar. So we just need more information and also specific Oracle application information from Avaloq in this case, that we can also just show. And then last, already mentioned it this morning, is the whole topic of reporting and capacity management. So again, that is also necessary in order to fulfill customers' requirements. And of course, our requirements is not only customers' requirements, but also ours. So reporting has to be set up in a way where we talked about enterprise customers earlier, we're only talking about banks. So of course, they have a very high standard. So of course, some basic features have to be present and have to work. And capacity management itself, of course, that's something that we don't have. We have trends. We used to have trends that we had for file systems, for example, but a trend doesn't really show capacity management itself, because I want to say that last month, for example, what is the next month going to look like based on the information from the last month? And I also want to be able to show time axis, what's going to happen in 3 months' time based on the last 6 months or whatever. Okay, so now let's start with the demo. As I said earlier, all of this was pre-recorded. I'm just going to show you. And we agreed that we're going to see what kind of questions we have later on, or also during the demo. And I actually have different topics that I'm covering here, and Matthias is then probably going to stop between the different videos and answer questions. Okay, so this is the demo. Let's take a look at all of the different things that we just discussed and things that are on our agenda, or just the Swisscom requirements or the Swisscom banking requirement. Let's get started with inventory. This is just a demo site. Some things are already inserted here in terms of information. So what we see here is just a normal Oracle host, and there's SGA info instances and PGA info. And if PGA, not all the information is necessary for every instance. Some people may be interested in fixed size, others may be interested in share pool, etc. And now, of course, it's nice if you can combine the two, and maybe you only see the information in a table that is interesting for you personally, instead of having three tables that you could open right here. And the idea is to sort of bundle this information or mix it. So let's take a look. What could that look like? Well, what have we done here? We now have used the 3 tables, PGA, SGA, and instances. So all of this is mixed now. So we've chosen SID. So this, in order to mix inventory data, you always have to have a unique key, a unique identifier. In this case, it's SID. And then we have used the version and the lock mode. And then from PGR, we use the following information: aggregate PGA, auto target, and maximum PGA used for work areas. And from SGA, we've chosen free SGA memory available and shared pool size. Whether or not that makes sense in that combination remains to be seen, but this is just an example in order to show you possibilities we have. So that means we're now in a position to actually use all the different tables and combine them or mix them if we a unique identifier. In this case, it's SID and the corresponding instances. So let's take a different example. So this is a different host right here. This host, we have our own inventory data that we've written ourselves. So we have a check that has the corresponding information gathered from the systems and is then writing it into the inventory. The idea behind that is that, first of all, in this case, for example, the release information for the application that is in Oracle has to be visible available at any time. So for all the staging processes and all the testing, you need to know which instance, which version is running on, when was it was being used, etc., etc. And of course, that is good to know. At the same time, we also want the information also for, well, we want to enrich them with additional information. So this is another example where all the instances and the information for Oracle is implemented, where we could combine it with lock mode or lock-ins, etc. So maybe not everybody needs all the information at any time. So for example, we see Oracle version. In our check, it's a little bit more detailed than in Oracle itself. And that is also something that's important for our colleagues. They need to have very exact figures. So let's take a look what we can do if we mix it and what it could potentially look like. So we have the SID, we have from our own lease, our own check, we actually have the Oracle version. And then from the official Oracle plugin, we have the logins, we have the recreation time, we have the restart time. And then we also have additional information from our Avalog application check. And those are all the examples that I wanted to show you, because other tables could be mixed as well. But what's most important is that there is a unique identifier. Okay, so hopefully you can hear me again. So that was the first video. Do you have any questions so far? Anything you want me to answer? Matthias, is there anything? I can't hear you, Matthias. Oh, can you hear me now? Yes. Okay, there are a couple questions that really don't have anything to do with it directly, but they're still very interesting. So there's one question with 5 words by Lenz Tost. He's saying, my DBAs still keep OEM around to monitor Oracle. I don't know OEM Oracle enough to say Checkmk could replace it. So his question is, could Checkmk replace Oracle Enterprise Manager? Are there things that OEM does that Checkmk does not? Or the other way around? Well, it's a very good question, and it depends on it depends on how technically versed your admin is, and it also depends on the application, the Oracle-based application, and also in what way you want to. It's always like that. So, of course, there are just specific tools that do specific things better. And the benefit of Oracle Enterprise Managers, as far as I know, is also that you can also do configurations and thresholds and things like that. And of course, with the Checkmk, you cannot do that, and you cannot edit Oracle or the basic settings. There's another question by Jens Dunkelberg, 11 votes. I hope it's being recorded and made available, because I would also like to show this to my Oracle colleagues. So I assume that you actually have custom plugins for yourself for the status data. Are they available anywhere on an exchange or anything like that? No. Those are application-specific things that we've created here. And it's like any other, well, the basis is very, very simple, to be honest. The agent, also, if there's an inventory check, it's transporting data, the agent is, right? So the data has to be transported. On the other side, there has to be an inventory check that is evaluating everything and then actually implements it into the inventory. So it's not rocket science, you know? It's very, very straightforward. Okay, so if any of you are interested, you can also contact Daniel personally. Maybe you can just help each other. Yes, correct. So that's definitely an offer. So after this presentation, also after the Q&A, you can contact me anytime. Over the course of these 2 days, just send me an email or chat with me, whatever. Okay, so Nicolaus' answer is going to be, and two, are they going to be implemented in Checkmk, these features? The answer is no, because they're very Swisscom specific. So just contact Daniel if you're interested. Oh, and caution, there are features. So mixing the information, the inventory, etc. Those are things. No, that's clear. That's clear. That's part of Checkmk. You were part of that as well. So in the inventory, you can also just capture data that is not long-term, but they can change any minute, and then you can gather them in a tree, in a structured status. I would say let's continue with the next video. Okay, let's continue. And then there's a Q&A session in the end anyways. Okay, so this is the next video. Enjoy. Okay, now we're going to continue with the Oracle-based checks. So those are checks which are based on Oracle, but overall, MK Oracle is just the transfer layer. It's sort of like piggyback, and that means MK Oracle is executing the SQL, and it then adds a section or puts the output in a specific section. And on the monitoring host, there are going to be a check that's been written by us or somebody else that's then evaluating the information. So now if you look at the Avalok environment, the banking application Avalok, there are specific parameters that have to be monitored: BGP, doclog, closest queues, and networks. And of course, we are monitoring them, and there are many of them. So it can be possible that on one host there could be roughly 500 individualized measuring points, or even more. And of course, they are then being listed, all of them. What we do here is we have several SQL, so one SQL for BGP, then we have one SQL for doclog, we have an SQL for networks, and we also have an SQL for process queue. And our SQL does the following. Overall, it gets all the, as it is commonly done in Checkmk, there's a list that's generated with the current status, information, and details, and this list is then being handed to the check via the agent, and the check is then created, or it's creating all the individual services rather. And all of that is a pretty simple solution, I would say, and that's extremely comfortable for us and convenient. And of course, that also, I would say overall, roughly, probably per host, it would be a minimum of 500 of these services in our test environment. So it's possible that it could be 1,000 of these services, to be honest. And yeah, that definitely makes it where we have less work, and that makes everything a lot easier. And what does all of that look like? Well, what you see here, this is just a bunch of these checks right here. It's also very important for us since this is an extremely big amount. So if one of them has a problem, that's okay, but what happens if SQL, for example, is indicating, so if the SQL is indicating something, in this case, it would mean that any single one would be critical, and for that reason, we then build a status check respectively for the individual type, BGT, etc., process queue, and so on. And that then gives us the error when in doubt if it doesn't get any information. And of course, that also means that all the other checks that are under that are unstable. So that means that overall, it's sort of like parent-child. You may know that from the JVM checks or from normal Oracle checks as well. So if it's not available, then all of the checks under it are going to go to stale, and the message is only on the instance check itself that is just not available, this DB. Now let's look at what we do in our inventory. In inventory, what you've just seen here, the information, there's already a lot included here in the status details and also in the long output. However, still for our colleagues, it's a lot easier. Sometimes it just says BGP number 1, 2, 3 as an example. And now I want to know what that means specifically. And in order to figure that out, we also have all the information we need in this inventory. And also we have tables that we can open up, and we can also filter, which make it a lot easier, because then you just see the alias and also the name, and based on that you can figure out what kind of object or what kind of application we are talking about. Okay, at this point in time, this was everything I wanted to say about Oracle-based checks. Matthias, let's continue with the next video, I would say. Yeah, and we're going to bundle all the questions in the end, because then we can go to room number 2 if we run out of time. So let's continue with the videos, and I'm going to look at questions until then. Okay, let's now look at the Oracle Custom SQLs. That's also something that's been around for a while in MK Oracle. So I'm in a position to actually execute custom SQLs, and the SQL is then attached, and you can also send over parameters and execute them as well. And of course, we are using that a lot. So sometimes we have up to 80 custom SQLs per DB or per instance that we are using, and those are the different SQLs. Some of them are very complex, some are very trivial. Important for us is that on the one hand, we can also send parameters, because every customer is different, every bank is different, and also all databases are very different, and all of that can change. So it's very important that when it comes to the MK Oracle CFG, we have to be able to do that. And another thing that's also very important to us is that we actually have information in regards to the duration of the respective SQL, because that, well, if I say, okay, 80 custom SQLs, of course, that's a long duration as well. And if many of them are executed every minute and there's just one bad one, then we want to know about that. And we want to be able to see it right away, and we can see it based on this very easily. And at the same time, we can also compare databases, because many of our customers have the same SQL, and every customer actually has different applications. In the beginning, we heard that Avalog has up to, well, overall, we have about 100 systems, and they actually use the core banking app like Avalog or Vinova, and that means that there can be endlessly different SQLs, but of course there's some applications that actually are being used by more or less every bank, so the SQLs can be the same, and that way you can also see which bank performs better, and also which server, how do I say that? Well, within this application, the customer only knows his own application, but since we're supervisors, we can definitely say, okay, you know what, particularly you have the same specifications, however, in your case, it takes a lot longer, so why don't you just take a look? There must be something you can do in order to fine-tune, because XYZ only requires half the time. Okay, so for us, the customer SQLs are extremely important, and yeah, we have hundreds that we're using, and we are also expanding that in the future. Avalog was really the core application that we started with. In Finova, we've done it manually first, or in a different way. We've also built our own framework, and of course, over time, we're going to do that as well with them. Okay, let's continue with the last video. So we actually finish on time. So we have one more slide that's very important after this. And I'm just going to discontinue if it's about capacity management. Okay, let's now look at the performators. So that whole topic is very important when it comes to Oracle, and also some information about reporting and capacity management. So what you see here, this is a host. So I've just filtered by uptime, DB time, memory, and performance. So this is one host with a number of instances and databases in the system. So what wasn't present before, and something that in our daily business was quite helpful, was if you actually can look at CPU utilization or memory utilization, and if you were able to filter by that. So that is what we did previously in our monitoring, which we were also running at the same time for Avalog applications. And of course, we wanted to replace that, because in this case, we have an added benefit of different things. So in comparison to our own system that we've built at one point in time. And of course, we needed the filter option, or just the overview in terms of utilization. Some people may remember that there was a performance check where you could see uptime, memory, DB time, CPU, etc. All of that was included in a check, and all of that is now something that you can sort of separate. Just to let you know, there's a rule set. It's called rule set discovery rule, auto performance discovery. And yeah, you create a rule. IO for us now is not all that important when it comes to the demo as well. And we then said, okay, we're going to extract from the performance check debit time, we're going to extract the memory system wait. Uptime is happening automatically. And this is the result you're getting. So now we're in a position to actually filter through it, and we can just see very well the utilization of all the different DBs. So it could be memory, it could be system weight, it could be CPU, it could be hit ratio, or also uptime. Okay, so at this point in time, I'm going to get back to our slides. We're done with our demos. So we are almost running out of time, so I just want to discuss challenges. We have had a lot of challenges that we were facing. Some of them we are still facing. So first of all, it's the number of services. Some of them are generated when I am just deploying MK Oracle. Some of our DBs without any restrictions. So for example, if you say no tables, or you can also ask for table space, which we are primarily not doing right now. And then sometimes I also have one DB with 30,000 services. Of course, it's Checkmk services, right? And that is, of course, impossible. There are many reasons why that's not going to work. Now, the number of customer SQLs is also something that is difficult for us as well. 60 customer SQLs, or also sometimes even more on one host. That's okay. That's not a problem. However, all of that also has to be managed in the Oracle CDB. And of course, the maintenance and also the optimization of all of that is quite difficult. Performance and timeout of agents. So as I said earlier, 30,000 services, you can imagine how long the MK Oracle is running if that's the case. So at one point in time, you're just going to have to say, okay, you know what, we're not going to check that because we have customer SQLs that also require some time. Sometimes we also just have too many databases that are causing everything to slow down too much. So if I have 30 databases, for example, if it's working with 10, it's not going to work with 30 most of the time. And that's not how it works, unfortunately. And then we also have customer SQLs that have very long durations so we just have to really get all the information about the customer SQLs. And then also we have all the Oracle SQLs themselves. So MK Oracle also has a lot of SQLs, and some of them actually have very long runtimes or durations as well. And then also the acceptance. The better the tool is, and the better it is. So of course, acceptance is growing. For us, that means more work to create custom SQLs, dashboards, and views, and not really driving our own monitoring. That's definitely another challenge. And then of course, also reporting capacity management as well. Lars already talked about that. And of course, that's also a big challenge for us. And of course, all the different requirements when it comes to different banking software. So we have prefixes, we have postfixes, etc. So small things actually are implemented in the MK Oracle as well, so that we can configure things like that. And of course, it's all just not a standard Oracle setup. So Oracle installed and done. No, they're extremely complex applications in some cases. And of course, that requires a lot of attention and work in terms of configuring them. And of course, you also have to have a lot of knowledge. So what does the future hold for us? Just to tell you, it's going to be a very bright future, hopefully. So Oracle monitoring in 2021. We definitely have a lot of work ahead of us from our side, and then also Checkmk. There are a lot of things that are still open right now, but we're on the right track, I would say. And for us, this is definitely one of the core points right now. It's still the performance. And of course, a lot of points that we can actually work on. First of all, it's really improving the runtime of MK Oracle itself, as well as our SQLs that we can optimize probably. Of course, all of that is very time consuming. And we also have the time, how long the check actually takes on the other days for parsing, or also for evaluating the results, etc. So we also think that we can actually save some time there, because our problem is that the agent at some point actually hits the timeout, and of course we can't do that if we really actually calculate that for individual services. Could be up to 1,500 services on one host, and if they're all on stale because the agent just wasn't executed quickly enough. And then views and dashboards, I'm going to summarize those two. So what's definitely important to us is that we have default Oracle views that need to be created, and also default Oracle dashboards in Checkmk. And let's see how far we're getting with that. We have some great ideas, and we're just going to have to see that it's similar to Docker SD. There need to be views that can be changed. And we also need something for our views and dashboards, which is a generic form. So if we have 50 databases, for example, they actually need to happen very quickly. You know, if you've developed it once, then it has to be the same for everything else. And that also means that you can just clone it or copy to all or whatever, something like that. Something like that has to be simplified in terms of the time. We already talked about parameter. We already talked about that. It's already in place. It's going to happen with 1.7. So Simon and Marcel, they worked on that a lot. So thank you very much for that. And then we also need further Oracle application views, so Oracle-based application views for Swisscom, but also for our customers as well. So that's for dashboards internally and externally. That'd be extremely helpful if that could actually be done for some instances and applications. Capacity management, yeah, well, it has to work everywhere. So that means that it's not just like a forecast or something like that for file systems, but it works for any check regardless of which one it is. I need it for performance, Oracle performance check, the CPU, for memory, for table space, etc. And of course, all of that has to work for GUI, but also for the digital paper later on in our reporting. And of course, the reporting has to work for all Oracle DBs without any limitations. It should be automated so that you actually create the report once, as you would with generic views and dashboards. So you just create it once, and then you don't have to adapt it ever again. Okay, so now we have our Q&A session, and yeah, so thank you. Yeah, okay, thank you, Daniel, for the presentation, also the videos that you've created. Why am I muted? Oh, I'm not muted. Okay, so because you said that you can't do a live presentation for security reasons, so we now have about 3 minutes in this room, and then we are going to room number 2 if you have further questions. Okay, so a question that I see here is, we have 7 votes. So Antje is asking, is it possible to have a report on that in the manual for the MK Oracle plugin with the Checkmk master rules? So the question is basically very similar to the question of Lance Toss. He says that he wants to integrate his own queries, just like plugins or local checks. Can you tell us how that works specifically? How do they have to be created? How can you set thresholds? How does that work? Well, Antje, well, yes, documentation is always good. So there's some documentation that's missing. I'm sure you're very surprised about that, but I really do feel that way. But I can tell you that it is described. I think Simon was the person that actually did that. So if you have the suitable connect that you're finding, okay, be helpful at this point in time, but I think we can actually manage that together. So how does everything work? It's not a local check or a plugin, but instead we have MK Oracle as a plugin, and then I actually have paths and folders where I place my SQLs, and then in the MK Oracle CFG, I actually indicate very clearly what kind of custom SQL I'm accessing. So in which interval, what parameters do I need, etc., etc. So all the functionalities that are possible, and then it is going to be accessed as well. So it's just the normal SQLs, the different sections that are default, whatever you selected earlier, and then after that, also the customer scripts. Okay, the customer SQLs, how do they give their results? How are they passed, or do they have to have a specific format, a specific table? Not a table, but of course, there's a format. So we have error codes 0, 1, 2, all of that has to be done by the SQL, and on the other side there's a corresponding check that's then evaluating it and then gives the output of the SQL in the service output and also the status. Okay, so the SQL is responsible for determining the status, and the check on the servers is just pretty simple and just takes that over. Yes, correct. Okay, one more question by Friedrich. Which interval are you accessing that? Is it on every minute, the MK Oracle? Yes. Well, as I said earlier, there are some limitations. So whenever it is possible, that is still what we're doing. It's not possible anywhere, but everywhere, but we're doing it. Of course, there are also, well, it's not in the slide, but we are trying to do something new, which is when it comes to 30 days databases, for example, it's possible, instead of doing it sequentially, you could also do it simultaneously. And we are actually working on that right now. We're trying to make it where we are sort of doing that in parallel, and hopefully that should give us the required added benefit, because our database systems have about 100 or 144 CPUs or even more. And it's not like they're bored or something like that, but this additional work at the same time make a difference. Okay, thank you very much, Daniel. We're going to have to stop at this point in time. And if you have any additional questions, you're going to find Daniel in conference room number 2, and you can ask more questions there. We are now going to take a short break, and we are continuing in at 4:45 with Faye talking about the Checkmk community. Thank you very much, and see you in a little bit. Anytime, if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you, Daniel, for taking care of that and being so helpful. Thank you.